All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back here to the Wisconsin Conservative Conversations. We're back here with yet another guest, another person to speak of. And again, like we did a couple weeks ago, we had Jay Schrader back on. Hey, you know what? When we have guests that are great quality people, when we have people that are have a strong message, we want to bring them back, especially as we move closer to this August 9th primary. We're looking 12 days away, 12, literally 12 from now. And these are going to be important primaries because we're looking at statewide candidates here in the state of Wisconsin: governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, treasurer. And the one that I might argue could possibly be just as important, if not more, than the actual governor's race. And that is the race of the attorney general. So tonight we are actually welcoming back here attorney general candidate here, Republican, Mr. Eric Toney. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me back on. Always a pleasure to be here.
No, I want to thank you because every time we run into each other, first I want to thank you for even just like saying, "Hey, what's going on, man?" Uh, because you really don't have to. There's several hundred other people you could be, talking to, engaging with. Just the acknowledgement, I do appreciate that.
Oh, it's been great. We've seen each other at, I don't know how many events it's been, and getting to know you, and you're helping move that conservative movement forward. And I always appreciate the opportunity to have a platform to help spread the message. And you help do that for so many of us. So thank you.
Well, you guys are putting in all the hard work, all the miles, all that other good stuff. So it's definitely an honor to do that. Now, guys, if you guys take a look there on the bottom once again, down there on that screen, you see scrolling is Eric Toney's website. So you make sure you check it out if you want to help him out, you want to learn more about his message, you want to volunteer, donate. These campaigns aren't cheap, and I'll be the first one to tell everybody that. So make sure you guys check that out. So without further ado here, and I got like this bionic fly flying around, so I do apologize if it looks like I'm dodging things. But no, let's jump into it because speaking about dodging things, Milwaukee's crime rate, homicides up what I hear 40% year over date, year to date from last year. On track to outpace the number of homicides in Milwaukee. And of course, like anything terrible, it has a way of metastasizing throughout the state. Yourself being a district attorney within Fond du Lac County, I'm sure you happen to see a lot of that blowover coming your way, especially going up and down 41. Looking at the role of the attorney general, what can we do to help, dare I say, mitigate? Because I don't know if we can stop it at this point. I feel like we have to do damage control first.
Yeah. The attorney general has an important role in reducing crime in Wisconsin. And number one, it starts with the attorney general and the message they convey in standing with our law enforcement and making sure that criminals know they are going to be held accountable and that we are going to stand with our cops, because we've seen Josh Call. He's not done that. We saw it in the wake of the Jacob Blake shooting in Kenosha, where he effectively turned his back on our law enforcement, especially as Tony Evers condemned and convicted a police officer with no facts. And so, number one, we need an attorney general that's actually going to stand with our law enforcement and support them. And as a DA in my 10th year and the son of a cop, there's no doubt that I'm going to be standing with our law enforcement. They've earned the right to have an attorney general that will stand with them. But then we look at, well, what does the attorney general do? And the attorney general is in charge of frontline prosecutors and prosecutors that preserve and protect our appeals on the criminal level at the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court, depending on how far up the case may go. But they're also in charge of those DCI agents and our training and standard for law enforcement and our crime labs. And so, number one, we have Milwaukee that's on pace for its third straight murder record. And as you were saying, that crime just doesn't stay in Milwaukee. It literally bleeds across Wisconsin. And that's in part because Milwaukee law enforcement is so understaffed and under-resourced that we need to give our attorney general original prosecution authority over Milwaukee County to take on those cases that they're unable or unwilling to prosecute. And that's going to take more resources for our Department of Justice, more prosecutors, more DCI agents, and we have to continue to evaluate the resources at our crime labs, because during this historic violence, the unfortunate reality is Josh Call has actually defunded prosecutors and DCI agents from our Department of Justice. and mismanaged our crime labs, taking in thousands of less items, testing thousands of less items, taking longer to do it in most categories, including DNA. And he should have actually been more efficient during this time, because the Wisconsin Supreme Court at one point shut down jury trials in Wisconsin, and then they limited our ability to continue to do those until there were certain operational plans. And in Milwaukee, even throughout 2021, they were throttled back in their trials. And so that what that means, and why this means that our attorney general should have been more efficient with our crime labs, is this: those crime lab employees were not driving all over Wisconsin to testify in court. That should have had them in the labs more, testing more, and getting more done quicker. But Josh Call has failed in his management of the crime lab. So that's number one, just on the things the attorney general can have an impact on, is making sure those positions are fully staffed, making sure we're deploying every possible resource we can across Wisconsin, especially in Milwaukee, as we're seeing that crime for now, what's going to be a third straight record of murders, likely, absent we pray a steep dive in those numbers. But we also need to address cash bail here in Wisconsin.
Right.
And I did that in 2017 on the Wisconsin District Attorneys Association board. We supported that constitutional amendment, which would have made it that judges could also consider the dangerousness of a criminal when setting bail, not just, as the Constitution says, the likelihood to appear in court. And I continue to support that today as president of the Wisconsin District Attorneys Association. But I've also pushed for some other things that we need with bail. Number one, what we need to do is define what it means to be likely to appear in court in our state statutes. That doesn't take a constitutional amendment to tell a judge that they must consider the dangerousness of a criminal, the number of open cases, bail jumping, substance abuse issues, lack of ties to a community, stable housing, stable employment, if we're facing mandatory minimums, all of these things that I argue in court all the time to say, Judge, this person is a risk, a flight risk to not make it to court because of all of these factors. And we'll get our judges in Fond du Lac County that will often order high cash bail because of those arguments. But unfortunately, some judges will not consider those factors because they believe it doesn't fit within the Wisconsin Constitution. So we need to define it in statute to force these judges to consider those things. And when we talk about mandatory minimums, we have very few crimes that have mandatory minimums. And we need to look at expanding that for violent crime to make sure that when these people are out committing murders and using guns to injure people, that they're going to face mandatory minimums and that they're not going to get a slap on the wrist. Because we're seeing, we talk about the homicides in Milwaukee, but that doesn't even include the non-fatal shootings, with a homicide rate at last year, and I don't know that it's gotten above this, under 50%. And that's in the homicides. That means people are literally getting away with murder in Milwaukee because law enforcement doesn't have the resources. They're getting away with non-fatal shootings. They're getting away with vehicle thefts, property crime, other violent crime. And that makes them think they can get away with it anywhere in Wisconsin. And that contributes to this surge in crime that we're seeing and the vehicle chases all across Wisconsin. And that doesn't even take into account the drug epidemic that we're seeing of historic overdose deaths in Wisconsin, with fentanyl being the driving force of that, where we have that border crisis. You don't need to go to Texas or the southern border to see it. All you need to do is walk into a Wisconsin courtroom and you will see that border crisis with the drug cases and the drug deaths. And I've sat across from too many parents that have had to bury their children or child. I've had parents talk to me about having to give CPR to their child time after time to bring them back from an overdose. I've had a dad come to me at an event and talk to me about losing his child to fentanyl, where that pain is real across Wisconsin. And I will join and file those federal lawsuits that are necessary to force the Biden administration to enforce our immigration laws so that we can start saving our kids and preventing the flow of illegal drugs into Wisconsin and the United States. And along with drugs comes human trafficking, and we need to stop to it. And we can do that with some of those common sense measures.
Now, one of the things that you had talked about was having the attorney general have original jurisdiction. For a lot of people that aren't well versed in legal jargon, what exactly does that mean?
So right now, if you want to prosecute crime in Milwaukee County, you have to be the Milwaukee County DA's office. The attorney general doesn't have the statutory authority to do that, except for very, very limited types of crimes, with racketeering being one that the Attorney General has original authority to file. So they need the Milwaukee DA's office to grant them as a special prosecutor to come in and handle crime. And we see that in limited circumstances. There are a couple of what we call gun prosecutors at the Attorney General's office that are assigned to the Milwaukee DA's office. And what I want to do is make sure we don't need permission from the Milwaukee County DA's office, that the legislature would pass a bill changing the law that would allow the Attorney General to have that original authority to file cases without permission from the Milwaukee DA's office, so we can stand with our cops, maybe take some of that political pressure off of Milwaukee and make sure that we're hammering down on violent crime. Because if we do that, we start to set the tone all across Wisconsin that if you commit crime, you're going to be held accountable, there will be consequences, and you won't get away with it.
And I think that's an important distinction, because like I said, I don't know how many people quite understand what that was. And then, another thing you had mentioned too was when it comes to bail. Oftentimes, and I think this goes hand in hand with the whole defund the police movement and the defunding prosecutors, the crime lab, all the other stuff that came along with the last couple of years. One of the things that I've heard over time was that people wanted to lower bail because it was like, well, they're poor, they're black, they're Hispanic. It was always taking race into account as if somehow that was supposed to be an excusing factor in the committing of these crimes. So rather than say, you shot at somebody and now you're on bail for $500,000, now it got reduced to 1,000, or you're released, ROR. As Attorney General, because I think there's a big philosophical shift from a leftist perspective versus a more conservative law and order one. How do we change something like that?
When we set bail, we're not taking somebody's skin color. We're not taking into account their gender. We're taking into account a lot of those factors that I just described before. And one of them, that I didn't mention, because it's if somebody has warrants where they've missed, or that's certainly going to lead to cash bail. And there's a lot of misinformation, I think, that gets thrown around. And I'll give you an example. Let's say like somebody's got an operating after revocation, which is a misdemeanor. You can go to jail for up to a year. Usually somebody maybe gets a drunk driving conviction. They didn't get their license back, and then they commit this offense by driving without their license while it's revoked. Now, that person may decide that they never want to show up to court. And under the Josh Call's proposal, he wants to eliminate cash bail. Well, I don't want to hold that person with no bail. I might want to have $50, $100 if they're missing court, some amount of money that says, you've got skin in the game, that you're going to show up to court. And if you don't, this money is going to be forfeited. Because to some people, they might pull $50 out of their couch cushion, but to some people, that's a lot of money. And so that's one of those ways that makes cash bail very important here in Wisconsin. And sometimes what we see, and this is a little inside baseball maybe, but another area of the law that we need to look at, two areas. So we want to also be able to hold people with no bail for dangerous criminals where the public is at risk. The crime is so heinous. We want to make sure they're held with no bail. But the statute in Wisconsin right now is really unworkable for prosecutors and courts to do that. And with a few simple changes to make sure that how that hearing is addressed to hold them with no bail, when that hearing is held, what the evidentiary standards are, and how often and when the person comes back into court. If we iron out some of those details, we can make that a workable statute to make sure that if we had some type of mass shooting or one of those horrific crimes, that we could hold them with no bail. We can get $5-10 million bails, and there are times where people have resources that they can post that. We've had people in Fond du Lac County post significant cash bails, and we want to have that opportunity. But one of the other things that leads to, if you were to data mine CCAP and look at bail and certain felonies, I think what you'd see is the number $500 to be relatively common. And there's I believe a reason for that. So if cash bail is under $500, the preliminary hearing time frame stretches out. If it's over $500, then you're going to have that hearing within about 10 days. And I think subconsciously, some of our judges don't want to have their calendar congested forcing these hearings within that time frame. And so they'll have it at $500 or less. And we need to move that number up, given what we're seeing, the type of crime, things of that nature, we need to make sure that that time frame and that dollar amount changes to reflect what we're seeing in society, to make sure the courts aren't maybe subconsciously using that as a crutch.
Is it that we don't have enough judges, or is it they just don't want to have their schedules front loaded? And I have to wonder about that throughout the entirety of the state.
It'll depend on the county that you're in. Some small counties, there'll be a one judge county, and maybe the workload isn't there. But if they're gone, that puts a strain on litigants, defendants, victims not getting into court. And even in counties like Fond du Lac, for example, just over 100,000 people, we have 5 judges that cover everything. And we'll have days where we might have 20 jury trials stacked up, and there could be multiple victims. There could be a homicide. There could be a sexual assault in there, a serious financial crime, another victim crime, domestic violence. You could have a drunk driving. Well, only one of those cases can go to trial at a time. And so it's very difficult to get cases into the system and get them to trial, because there's just not enough court time. There aren't enough prosecutors to be able to take all of these cases in courts. And so, we really have to look at our criminal justice system and decide what we want that system to be, what type of money we want to invest in it, to make sure that, we want to make sure defendants get their opportunity in court. But oftentimes there's a victim on the other end of that case that's waiting for justice. And we may read about it in the newspaper, or the prosecutors may see it when it comes into court, but for those victims, that's day in and day out. I mean, earlier this year, I did a intentional homicide trial that took years to get to court. And that's what victims deal with day in and day out. And we've got the best system in the world. We just have to make sure that it's funded properly.
Well, I think there's a funding issue, and then there's a staffing, because like you say, there's only so much that you can do with what the resources you currently have. Um, does that become more of a deterrent to the crime problem that we have now? And again, like you said this earlier, what happens in places like Milwaukee, Madison, Fond du Lac, all these things bleed out into more rural areas. And being someone who does live in a very rural area, I can certainly see it on some of the main thoroughways, and of course from a lot of the stories that I hear. Just it is an interesting conundrum, because with the issue of drugs, for example, it's not so overt and in your face as it might be, say, in Milwaukee. It's a lot more subtle, but it is here.
It's everywhere. And when you see the type of seizures that we just did a story with NBC 26 yesterday on the seizures from our local law enforcement. And it's the number of seizures, and it's the quantity of drugs that is being seized when this is occurring, where, we used to see, if you take methamphetamine, for example, they'd be what we'd call like a shake and bake, where it'd almost be like a 2-liter bottle that somebody would have their at-home meth kit. Well, we're not even really seeing those anymore, because it's so cheap for the cartels to be just shipping this in huge quantities, and they're willing to take the bite off of whatever law enforcement customs is able to intercept before it makes it to their distributors. And we're seeing, we used to see heroin. We hardly ever see heroin anymore. What we're seeing is fentanyl. And that's what's been driving these overdoses. And, you might not be seeing it, but it is there. And that's what makes interdiction from our law enforcement, our canines, so important, to make sure we can be pulling these drugs off the streets. And when we do that we can build cases through social media, text messages, digital messages, that we can build what we call historical drug conspiracies, where instead of maybe putting a small amount or even a large amount of product on somebody, we can put multiple deliveries or conspiracies and wrap multiple people into these cases and pull them off the streets. And when you do that, you disrupt a network of delivery, and you disrupt the drugs to that community, where you can help get people into treatment because they can't get the drugs that they want. And so there's a lot of benefit to that. And we've worked pretty hard with our cops in Fond du Lac County to build some of these big conspiracy cases.
Right. And speaking of, building conspiracy cases and working with the community, how can we do so, as an attorney general? What would be ways that between the Office of the Attorney General, prosecutors, law enforcement, to build those relationships with the community? To that end, I mean, obviously, these are issues that impact an area, the entirety of the state, and of course, people that just want to go about their business. But unfortunately, these crimes are going to happen, and they affect the average person. So how would the attorney general's office be able to, I guess, reach out to those communities, reach out to those people working with just the average ordinary citizen?
Our Department of Justice, as we've talked about, is in charge of those great DCI agents, and
Hmm.
they're based in all different parts of Wisconsin. They're assigned to drug units across the state. They handle general crimes that occur, and those agents have great relationships with local law enforcement, where that relationship can help get the Department of Justice in with community members to talk with them. Like we've done heroin summits here in the past. That's a way to get DOJ, DCI agents
Hmm.
into communities, or when you have recovery groups and other things like that, where parents want to know, what should they expect if their child is battling addiction, and these agents can be part of that process because the local law enforcement has those community connections, and we have them
For awareness campaigns.
exactly, and we can use that to help push them into other areas and make sure the public knows that those DCI agents are a resource to them.
Mhm. Now, one of the things just last week it was you had a debate
Yes.
on the Dan O'Donnell show, and in there you had your two primary opponents, Mr. Adam Jerichow and Miss Karen Mueller. And I thought it was interesting. I got to listen to a good portion of it, but I found it was fascinating to me because I'm listening to two essentially civil attorneys and a district attorney talking about the various issues and everything going in hand here. Um, Obviously, we've talked a lot about your work as an attorney general, or excuse me, as a district attorney, and what you've been able to do with this. When you look at other things that separate yourself as a DA versus the civilian attorneys, what are other things that you think would make that more qualified for the attorney general's office?
One of the things is just management. As a district attorney, I don't just prosecute cases in court. I'm managing off an office of prosecutors and support staff, and also coordinating and working with local law enforcement, state law enforcement, and federal law enforcement in putting together the budget of my office, which involves county and state funds. But on top of that, I'm also the president of the Wisconsin District Attorneys Association.
Mhm.
And I think I'm in about my 6th year or so on that board. And what we do is we work with our Department of Justice budget, we work with our public defender's budget, we work with the budget of the court system and prosecutors to put what we call a budget coalition together for the justice system, to make sure that we're trying to get the funds that we need to carry this mission across the state to find justice for victims and keep our community safe. So I have the unique perspective of being a prosecutor and actually using and helping deploy these resources in the prosecution of cases with our law enforcement, working with the actual employees at the Department of Justice, and working through these budget issues and that management experience on top of it, where I've had to work through the state
Yeah.
bureaucracy. We've now hired or promoted every single person in my office, and I've changed the culture in the Fond du Lac County DA's office, where we're known as a tough on crime office and have respect from law enforcement in our region because of how we prosecute cases. And I'm the figurehead, I suppose, of that, but I'm really proud of the attorneys and support staff in my office and the police and law enforcement that I get to work with to drive that public safety and have that tough on crime reputation. I also have the unique perspective of having been on the other side of the aisle. Actually, I did 2.5 years in private practice, where I did juvenile law, mental health law, a little bit of bankruptcy, and criminal defense law, where I've seen these justice issues from both sides of the aisle. I've had those candid conversations with clients, and being the son of a cop gives added perspective of, I've
Mhm.
never walked a day in the life of a police officer, but I've seen my dad make those sacrifices day in and day out, and like to worry about his safety and not know if he's alive. And so when you put all of that perspective and experience together, that lets me hit the ground running on day one to manage our Department of Justice. And as DA, we also deal with civil issues, constitutional issues, and that's something I've had to deal with in some pretty complex areas. When I refused to enforce the mask mandate back in August of 2020, that wasn't
Mhm.
necessarily the most popular decision for some, but it was the right decision because I follow the rule of law, not just when you agree with the law. And when that illegal extended safe red home order came out in April of 2020, we never enforced that in Fond du Lac County either. And I actually started a task force to try and reopen our community. And all of the small number of cases we filed from those first 13 days, I made sure they were dismissed. And there was no judge that said that had to happen. There was no defense attorney demanding that it happened, because that order had never been declared unlawful. But I still knew it was the right thing to do to dismiss those cases. And that's a track record of following and enforcing the rule of law that gives me the credibility to run our Department of Justice and put Tony Evers and Josh Call on trial in November at the ballot box for their failures as they played politics with public health and public safety.
Well, I'm glad you brought up that COVID, issue, because that was definitely something that when I've talked to a lot of different people, and I've had people ask me, well, what do you think about this race? What do you think about that? Well, I kind of like this. I see this, but when we speak about the attorney general's race, they're quick to bring that up. And I'll often ask them, I was like, okay, did you read the follow-up stories that came along with that? The why of why this happened, why these, for the first, 14 days, why that was charged as such. Your opponent, Adam Jerkow, had mentioned that, hey, that's a huge inconvenience because they got to worry about whether they're going to be prosecuted, whether they have to get an attorney, all this other stuff. Did any of this actually make it to court at this particular point?
Yep, we had some of the cases that they were filed. But what I think is important to remember, and I see Adam across the state, not as much lately since convention, but he's outright lied about my record on COVID. Where he started, it was we enforced the mask mandates, and then we proved that wasn't true, because there's actually a letter that I sent to my local officials telling them this is unlawful. I signed my name to it on August 3rd of 2020. So we proved that was a lie. So then it switched to we enforced the illegal order. Well, then we proved that was a lie because I started a task force the day that was to take effect, and we never enforced it. And we showed every case was filed from those first 13 days. So we proved that was a lie. So then they just say, well, we prosecuted people, and they try to leave that impression as if somebody's been convicted of something.
Correct.
And we never convicted anybody of anything related to COVID, safer at home, or masks. And we never shut down a single business or church. But he doesn't want to tell the true story, because I think the reality is he's trying to distract from his record or lack of a record, where he's actually, I think, probably the only Republican statewide candidate that I'm aware of that supports legalizing marijuana, recreational marijuana. He's been on record saying it once for sure, and then a couple times where he's strongly been advocating in favor of that. And that's just the wrong direction for Wisconsin. But what Adam doesn't talk about as well, back in April of 2020, he was asked, well, if you're advising the governor, what would you do? And he said, well, I'd work with the legislature, and we need to make sure there's requirements for people to wear gloves and masks in bars and restaurants. Right. And social distancing and capacity limits. And so I think one of the things we all know is what we were told during the early stages, we've learned wasn't true in some respects. Right. And we've learned so much more in the days, weeks, and months that we move forward. But he tries to hide from that record. And I wonder, if he wants those requirements, who did he want to enforce them? Because I can tell you the only people that could enforce them would be district attorneys.
Right. Well, it was interesting because when you think back during that time, March, April, May, there was a lot of unknown variables, and I think all of us trusted a lot of what we heard out there. I know, CDC is highly questionable these days, but at that time,
you're not ducking for cover on monkeypox, are you?
No. I'm just. It's like my third apocalypse I've kind of been through. So at this point, I'm just like, oh, number 4. It's 2022. Why not?
I do want to point out as well, this authority that was exercised during that time, that came from the legislature. They gave the Department of Health Services certain authority in Chapter 252. Right. And when the Supreme Court struck down that extended order, one of the things they said was you can still shut down schools because you have that explicit statutory authority. What they said is you didn't have the explicit statutory authority for everything else, and you needed to go through rulemaking with the legislature because of Act 21 passed under Governor Walker. And even for the governor's original order, that also came from his public health emergency authority under Chapter 323, which a legislature passed many decades ago to give that type of authority to the governor. And if Adam Jarkow didn't like that authority, he could have worked to try and change that when he was in the legislature. I don't think anybody really expected to be in a pandemic situation, so I don't really fault him for that. But that was authority a legislature many decades ago had given to our public and to our governor.
Right. And I think that's a very, very important distinction there. Now, let's move on to the campaign trail right now, because one of the things that we've seen here during this primary cycle is there's been a bit of a division here between GOP groups. We got patriot groups, we got single issue groups, and I think you've been to them all. Like literally have been to them all. I've seen you at a ton of them. What's been the reception you've been getting from the various groups and just bringing your message out to them?
It's been positive and supportive because I'm not going to tell you something just because you want to hear it. I'm going to be upfront, tell you how the law and the facts apply and enforce the rule of law. And I've yet to meet the person on the campaign trail that says, I just want you to enforce the rule of law when you agree with it, because that's not how the rule of law works. But unfortunately, that's what Josh Call is doing. He's looking to enforce the rule of law when he agrees or when he thinks it's popular with his base. And the reception I've gotten, whether it's patriot groups, GOP groups, law enforcement, our towns associations, nonpartisan groups, has been overwhelming, that people want a prosecutor and not a politician leading our Department of Justice, somebody that's going to enforce the rule of law, standing with our cops to keep our communities safe and defend the integrity of our elections. And that's what my track record is as a district attorney, where people see that none of the other candidates in this race, who have some nice skill sets in areas, but they've never prosecuted a case before. They've never actually used the resources of our Department of Justice. And we haven't elected an attorney general without that experience, I think, in nearly 60 years. And we don't have time for on-the-job training right now. And that's something that resonates across the state. Whether even when I talk about my COVID record, I routinely, almost every time I talk about it, get applause from our grassroots. And I think that's indicative of the convention, the state convention, where I received
Yes, sir.
% of our endorsement vote, doubling up my nearest primary opponent, Adam. And I even won his home county's endorsement vote. And that's kind of the thing, that when the people that know you best go in a different direction, that should be a sign.
Hey, by the way, I got to give a shout out to you for that convention speech, because that's just facts are facts. That speech was fire. That was probably like the second best speech of the evening. And, I got my biases, because I'm working with Orlando Owens for his campaign. But at the same time, you got to acknowledge skills when they were there. And that speech was awesome. So it was good to see that, because it was motivating. It was the type of thing that we want to see. And I think, during this election cycle, we want to see, there are things we don't want to see: negativity, things we want to see. We want to see passion, drive. We want to see people that actually truly legitimate, and they have the best interests of the people of the state of Wisconsin. And I think that speech and the reception that it got certainly reflected upon that.
Well, and I, one of the things, I had no idea what I was going to say until probably 3 or 4 in the afternoon, the day of that speech. And it had been a long, grueling campaign up until that point. And you bring up the negativity. At that point, I don't think any Republican candidate had been attacked as much as I had from Republicans, other people that had and are in this race for attorney general. And it was especially negative leading into the convention with the mailers that were done, the attacks. And even, some of the listeners, if they weren't at convention, might not be aware of this, but Friday night into Saturday, that campaign was sliding these sheets of paper. I actually have it right here, of all things. This sheet of paper, two pages, underneath the doors of pretty much everybody that was staying in the convention hotel, and I think nearby. And they didn't even have put their name on it, with more of the lies. And it got such to the point that a group of, I think, about 11 of our sheriffs signed a letter saying that Adam Jarkow was running a gutter campaign that would make him unfit to be a police officer in Wisconsin, based off of the lies that he's told, based on what we call Brady Giglio issues. And that's a pretty powerful statement when Wisconsin sheriffs from across the state are going to write a letter like that, where they want an attorney general that is going to enforce the law in front. And that's what we expect from people running for attorney general. So it was very disappointing to see that type of campaigning. But at the end of the day, people are in charge of their campaigns, and we've worked to keep a positive message and contrasting where there are issues that we may disagree on, because at the end of the day, Josh Call is what we need to focus on, making sure that he's a one-term attorney general, because if we don't stop him now, I can almost guarantee he is going to be running for governor in 4 years. It is a nightmare that none of us want to live through, given what we've seen from his atrocious track record as attorney general here in Wisconsin.
Well, when we take a look at, what the Office of the Attorney General can and can't do, some of the things they do is they sign on to certain, federal lawsuits. One of the ones I remember was the lawsuit against Obamacare. And then, of course, I've heard of, well, we're not really going to enforce this law. It's like, what do you mean? Roe v. Wade recently struck down. And there's a lot of people that are very ardent, pro-abortion. Other people that are very adamant pro-life. But I recall hearing something with regards to Mr. Call saying that, well, Roe v. Wade being what it is, whatever, we're going to go ahead. I'm not going to prosecute these people. Given that the Wisconsin state law is what it is, the 1847 law that's currently on the books. How do you respond to something like that? I mean, it just seems like it's more ideologically driven than rule of law.
You nailed it on the head. And he came out and said that he's not going to enforce the Wisconsin abortion ban because he disagrees with it. And he went further and said he's not directing any DOJ resources to it. And he then filed a frivolous lawsuit trying to overturn that ban, and he knows he's because he didn't ask for any type of injunction or anything to enjoin or stop the enforcement of the ban, because he knew that would rocket up to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and they would tell him once again how wrong he is on the law. And I actually, I listened to his speech, I watched it afterwards, and he said something to the effect of, paraphrasing, but that he's not going to enforce the abortion ban, and he's not going to direct any DOJ resources, prosecutors, DCI agents, because that would take them away from other crimes in Wisconsin that would make Wisconsin less safe. And when you look at Josh Call's own words, that he's made Wisconsin less safe by defunding prosecutors and DCI agents from our Department of Justice, depriving us of those resources during historic violence. And on top of that, now has the gall to say that he is going to pick and choose when he's going to enforce the rule of law, depending on how it fits with his personal political ideology. That is wrong. And on day one, I will dismiss that frivolous lawsuit that he filed as our attorney general, and I will enforce the rule of law like I do as a DA, just like I will as the attorney general, because there are times, I'll tell you, I don't always like the law, but we enforce it. And I'll give you an example. Chapter 980 are violent sex offenders. And that law allowed people, you could be a Milwaukee County violent sex offender, and then they might say, well, we can't find housing for you here, so we're going to you in Fond du Lac County.
Right.
We became the dumping ground for that. And there wasn't much we could do to stop that from happening. But we would go to court and we would try to fight it where we could. And then myself, our sheriff, our town board members, their attorneys, corporation counsel, we all worked with our legislature to change the law. And we actually got the law changed to say you have to go back to your county of residence. So you can't make another community a dumping ground for another community violent sex offenders. And so we had to work within the constraints of the law, but we also worked to change it. And that's what we expect our attorney general to do: enforce the rule of law. We don't want activist judges. We don't want an activist attorney general. We want the lawmaking to remain with the legislature.
And I'm glad that you brought that up, because that was going to lead me to my next question, because I think so often, because of the political polarization here that we have in Wisconsin, I think throughout the nation, we see people that are like, well, so we want conservative judges. Okay, I get it. You want a originalist in terms of their interpretation of the Constitution and what the rule of law is. But do you want an activist judge, or do you want a judge or a prosecutor, whichever, that does things based on the rule of law, not because you agree with it, disagree with it? There's a lot of things that we don't agree with, but we still got to do. Most of us do that 8 to 10 hours a day, but that's a whole nother story. But the point is,
Well,
oh, go ahead, please.
You hit it on the head when we talk to us. when we look at the Constitution and the words mean what they mean and statutes mean what they mean, we see so many on the left that what they want to do is interpret and go down these rabbit holes and try to tell you what they think it means. And when we have that textualist approach, that provides consistency and stability where people can understand what's going to happen and not creating things out of the air. And that is what we see from so many of these liberal judges. And we just want people that are going to enforce the rule of law and not try to create their own laws from. And I'm proud to be endorsed by Wisconsin Right to Life and Wisconsin Family Action, that they know that I'm going to defend the right to life here in Wisconsin and enforce the rule of law. And when Wisconsin Family Action makes their endorsements, viability and electability are one of the key factors that they look at.
Mhm. Yeah, another issue, and let's go to another extreme from, you got places that are trying to be sanctuary states, sanctuary counties. Now I'm hearing, sanctuary for abortion. But then to the other side of it, you get the 2A groups. And don't get me wrong, I'm a 2A absolutist. It is my belief that my Second Amendment should be so incredibly absolute. If I want to have a Sherman tank in my driveway, I should be able to have one.
You get enough Pepsi caps and you might get that.
You never know, cut enough UPC barcodes out. You just don't know. Could you imagine mailing that in and actually happened? Wow. Used to be able to get a gun that way back in the day. But when it comes to something like that, does that serve when you start having sanctuary cities, sanctuary counties, regardless of the cost, Second Amendment, abortion, whatever? Doesn't that kind of fly in the face of the rule of law? Or is that something where these are hard stands that need to be happened?
Well, I think what it does is it signifies a municipality or community or a state and how they stand on those particular issues. It may not have the force of law behind it because we have the Constitution of the United States in Wisconsin, and we follow that. And sometimes we don't like it, but we have to make sure. And one of the examples I like to give is if we rewind the clock to when Roe versus Wade was still the law of the land, the Democrats would say that's a constitutional right to have an abortion, and they would do everything they can to push the envelope on that and expand what they viewed as a right. And then we contrast that with the Second Amendment, and they will do everything they can to stampede, trample, overrun, and get rid of it, picking and choosing when they would enforce what they viewed as a constitutional right. And they would actually take one that's an enumerated constitutional right and try not to defend and enforce it. And it boggles the mind and shows the hypocrisy of so many on the left, because the Second Amendment is a constitutional right. I'm a lifetime NRA member, AQ grading from the NRA, where I am going to defend our Second Amendment. I oppose red flag laws, and Josh Call actually proposed red flag laws to help, as he said, stop the violence that we were seeing in Milwaukee. It just shows how out of touch he is with the real issues facing us here in Wisconsin. And one of the great examples that I like to give, if anybody's listening, a concealed carry card handy, I hope they take a look at it. Take it out of your wallet or purse or wherever you have it in your desk, because what you're going to see on there, if you got it from Brad Schimmel, the bottom left of your card will say Brad Schimmel, Attorney General. And if you got it from Josh Call, it will say at the bottom left, Office of the Attorney General. And what does yours say?
I got Brad's signature on here, or his name on here, but it doesn't really show against the blue screen. But I'm due next year, so you end up winning this. I got your name on here.
Well, and so that's the thing. Josh Call won't put his name on that card because he doesn't stand with our Second Amendment. On day one, my name goes on that card as your Attorney General. I'll gladly reissue you a new one or sign your card when I see you at an event, because I'm going to defend our Second Amendment. And we need to make sure we have an Attorney General that will do that and that has a track record of standing up for the rule of law.
Now, staying on the topic of Second Amendment, clearly there's an assault on the Second Amendment. There's been a rash of mass shootings, and I'm very reluctant to use the terminology, it's a mental illness, because once you go down that road, it's my belief that, let's say 15 years ago, I was going through a divorce and I had to battle depression. Well, man, that's the reason why you can't have a gun now. You could really stretch that out of proportion, I think, as opposed to the individual who's, I don't know, schizophrenic,
Yeah.
you know. Um, but we're starting to see a lot of this. Unfortunately, you have people that just do evil things. And it doesn't matter if they're doing it with guns, it doesn't matter if they're doing it with vehicles. We saw that in Waukesha. But guns, these big, nasty, black plastic tools here, and that's what they are. They're tools. It's like we're trying to just ban them outright, little by little. How
Well,
can we protect ourselves here in the state of Wisconsin against an overreaching federal government that we know when they try to pass laws like this is where it gets kind of fuzzy because we don't want to be activists. We want to follow the rule of law, but at the same point,
well,
what's
and
right in the Constitution? Go ahead, sir, please.
yeah, and I think what's interesting there, we have some case law, we have history in what the Constitution and how that has been decisions that have happened from the Supreme Court. And so when we see if it were the United States Congress or a Wisconsin legislature that would pass some type of bill that would infringe on our Second Amendment, then it's the obligation of the Attorney General to step in and challenge to make sure that we are trying to overturn those laws to protect and defend our Second Amendment. But you have to follow the law. You can't just do it for political partisan reasons, like we've seen Josh Call do with that abortion ban here in Wisconsin. He's clearly wrong on the law, and he knows he is, and he's just playing politics with the issue. And so we need to make sure that we're being cautious, evaluating, but stepping in when there's that overreach that occurs. And one of the ways we do that with our Attorney General's office is during Brad Schimmel's tenure, we had the Solicitor General's office that would take on some of these complex constitutional cases. And that's what I'd like to see come back. I'd like to work with our legislature, bring the Solicitor General's office back to our Department of Justice to make sure we've got these fantastic constitutional attorneys that we can help defend our Constitution here in Wisconsin and the United States to make sure those type of things don't happen.
And I think that's very important that we have a attorney general that's going to be active in that sense and sticking up for the Constitution and, as it relates to the people of Wisconsin here. Final topic here. And I like this one here because I'm seeing this everywhere. And it's kind of funny because a part of me is like, I don't know how much weight I put into this, but there is some weight into it. I'm looking at these endorsements. And I'm looking at the people that have spoken on your behalf. You got the president of the Wisconsin State Lodge of Fraternal Order of Police. You've got the Milwaukee Police Association president. You got Fond du Lac Sheriff. You even have my county in here with Sheriff County. Wisconsin Right to Life Family Action, Racine Police Association. You have a list of police, sheriffs, counties, all kinds of DAs there that have endorsed you. Today, I saw two more that came down the pipe there. Bob Denal, Wisconsin Conservative Digest, as well as Wisconsin Right Now, Jessica and Jim over there.
I haven't seen your breaking news.
I don't know if it was an outright endorsement, but it was a well-written article they have out there. I'll have to send that to you.
Okay.
But I was reading that before I got home, and I was like, oh, snap. Or maybe it's an endorsement without being an endorsement. I don't know.
So I am really humbled to be law enforcement's choice in this race, to be endorsed by over 100 of our sheriffs, police chiefs, and DAs from across Wisconsin. And what's really unique about that is it's bipartisan. I've got Republican and Democrat sheriffs and DAs that see the failure that Josh Call has been and know that we need a prosecutor and not a politician leading our Department of Justice. And these endorsements are from all corners of Wisconsin. And to have the Racine and Milwaukee police associations that have endorsed me, even from the Wisconsin Fraternal Order of Police. And we have another police union that just endorsed. We haven't released it publicly, so we're kind of breaking the news here. But the Milwaukee Police Supervisors Union for the Milwaukee Police Department, of nearly, I think, 200-300 of those supervisors. We've got the rank and file cops. We've got the supervisors, and the law enforcement knows that we need a proven prosecutor, not a politician, as our top cop. And we also have been endorsed by Congressman Glenn Grothman. Really proud to have Congressman Grothman's endorsement here. And every sheriff in our 6th congressional district has endorsed me, other than, I guess, technically Milwaukee County has just a tiny part of the 6. And as you can imagine, the Milwaukee has not endorsed me. But our law enforcement knows and hit the ground running to be our top cop. And I'm incredibly humbled and honored to have this level of support, especially in a primary election where there are other choices, or they could have decided to just sit it out and coalesce around someone else, but law enforcement has made their voice loud and clear. And, what I'm asking is for people's vote on August 9th, that they stand with their law enforcement and support me on August 9th. And you can go to erictoney.com and learn more information. And I've hit 61 counties, and I am keeping my foot on the gas and making sure that we have an attorney general that we can be proud of and somebody that can defeat Josh Kaul in November.
And I think that's really important. Here, it's interesting. We're having this conversation, and I don't think in past election cycles we've had this platform of video cast, podcast, this type of thing. That it's really been as active as it has been in these election cycles. I think this might be the first year it has been so active. There's myself. There's obviously there's a couple other ones. Badger State Resistance, Straight and Wire. You've got Mike's always right up there in the Eau Claire area. I don't know what a lot of these cats are doing. I do know them, but for me, and as I like to jokingly say, for me and my 4 listeners, because we got a running joke with my wife. She's like, "Yeah, it's 4 listeners. Okay, I'll take them."
Yep.
But I got 4 good listeners. But the thing is, though, is that the people that listen to these podcasts that I put out here, these are really high value, high intelligent. They understand what's going on. They know the difference between a candidate that's going to fight for them and not. And I'm looking, having met you several times, having had several conversations with you. I've, talked with you have interviewed one of your primary opponents and spoken with the other one. But at the end of the day, man, the experience of a DA, to me, that is what solidifies my vote. And take $5 in my endorsement, and you can get yourself a Happy Meal at McDonald's. But bottom line here, the $5 is worth more. But point is, though, when I'm talking to people, I'm talking about Eric Toney for the Attorney General.
Well, I truly appreciate that support. And I kind of think about 2012 when I was running for district attorney in Fond du Lac County as a 28-year-old kid. And to win that Republican primary, which meant I was going to be our next DA because there was no one else on the other side for the general. A very humbling moment to have a community of 100,000 people say, I am the best person to help keep our community safe. And that's effectively what I'm asking for now, is for Wisconsin to say, I'm the best person to be our top cop to help keep us safe. And I have been humbled to be able to do that here in Fond du Lac County. And given my dad's career in law enforcement, my career as a prosecutor, I would be honored to have everyone's vote on August 9th. And I hope I've earned it as you learn more about my candidacy as I've traveled across Wisconsin, or going on my website or social media or talking to others. And if I have already earned your vote, please talk to your friends and family and spread the message, because they do listen, they do care, and you make a difference, because every vote counts. And I'm keeping my foot on the gas until we get across the finish line and all the votes are counted. And I'd love to have you there with me.
Well, and I think that's an important thing too. You said this: when you talk to one person, they talk to 2 others, those 2 talk to 4 others. And it is so incredibly important. And as you mentioned earlier, your website, we got that scrolling down the bottom here. It's erictoney.com. Make sure you check it out. Volunteer if you can, donate if you can. I know times are tough. It's a technical recession, depending on how the Biden administration defines it. But that's a whole nother show.
End quote, repeat line.
End quote, repeat line. Yes. But no, and that's, like I said, when I see the fact that you've been out here, you've been in 61 counties, I've seen you at a bunch of them. The message you're putting out there, I'm proud to tell you that I have your yard sign in my front yard for the world to see.
Well,
and
thank you.
Come August 9th, we're going to do what we can to help you get across that finish line. So
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
No, thank you again. I always value your time because, again, you guys have such a busy schedule, very hectic. And time, I know you got a lot of places to go, a lot of people to see, but definitely thank you for launching it tonight, 8 o'clock on YouTube, and getting it out to all the social media platforms.
Right now, and this will probably be about the first time, because regardless of that's in a murder trial unless something changes with our court hearing tomorrow. And so you have that opportunity, I think, like many of us, but circumstances may be a little different this year as I've got a murder.
And let's also acknowledge that too. We always, everybody talks about how busy they are. It's a attorney general candidate and prosecuting people. I'm just saying.
Everybody's busy. Our work just happens to hit the media a little more, I think, but opportunity. I greatly appreciate the support and hopefully have earned the support of the listeners out there as well.
Can do in the future, by all means, please let us know. And thank you to Carlton for arranging this for us. Awesome guy. All right, Eric, have a great time. Be safe on the road. It's going to be awesome.
Right.
Thank you. Bye. All right, guys, that was Eric Toney here. He's running for. Generally don't give out too many different endorsements or anything, but you know what? When we take a look at the Attorney General's to say who you're really going to be pulling for. And at the end of the day, I'm thinking about, do we want to continue with the revolving door of the criminal justice system? I'm thinking who's going to be there to stand as the vanguard against an overreaching federal government and use the tools at their disposal to safeguard the people of Wisconsin. When I think about that in the Attorney General's office, Eric Toney's that person. It's my opinion. I encourage you guys to check it out. His website's down there. We'll be dropping this episode tonight, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. Until then, good night. God bless you. God bless the USA. God bless Wisconsin. Have a wonderful one. I'm out.